Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Ready for another journey through history? Today, we're going deep into the Boxer Rebellion by Diana Preston.
Ah, yes. This book is a real page-turner.
It is. We're going to uncover all those fascinating events and turning points, the things that really make you think, wow, how did this happen? You know, those key moments that shaped history.
It's a story that's often oversimplified, but Preston does an amazing job of revealing all the complexities and nuances. We'll be digging into that for sure.
Absolutely. We'll be exploring those hidden layers, getting to know figures like the Empress Dowager, and seeing the siege through the eyes of those who actually lived through it.
Really putting ourselves right there in the middle of it all.
Exactly. So imagine it's 1900, you're in China.
A time of incredible change.
Yeah, huge changes. You've got steamboats on these ancient rivers. Talk about a clash of old and new, right?
Yeah.
And then you have the X-ray machine, this cutting-edge technology making its way to China.
A real marvel of the time.
But meanwhile, out in the countryside, there's this growing sense of unrest. Whispers of rebellion are starting to spread.
And this is where Preston really excels. She contrasts this rapidly changing China with what's going on in the rest of the world.
Right, like setting the global stage.
Exactly. So while Europe is completely fascinated by this whole Orient mystique, and America is flexing its muscles over in the Philippines,
China's dealing with its own set of challenges.
definitely. They're facing this wave of change that's causing a lot of friction and resentment, especially among those who feel like they're being left behind, pushed aside by this new world order.
So that resentment, it kind of finds a focal point, a way to express itself through the Boxer movement, right?
Yeah, that's right. But here's the thing. It wasn't this unified, organized army that many people imagine.
More like a bunch of different groups coming together.
Exactly. And Preston does a great job of highlighting that. The Boxers were actually a mix of various groups, each with their own specific complaints and anxieties.
So who are we talking about here?
Well, you had the big swords, mainly landowners who were really protective of their land and their way of life. And then you had the spirit boxers. These were mostly ordinary people from rural areas.
So different backgrounds, different motivations, but united by this sense of unease.
Exactly. They saw these foreign influences as a direct threat to their traditions, their livelihoods, like everything they held dear was being challenged.
And it's easy to see why their fear extended to technology, right? Things like railways, which they called iron centipedes, they saw them as violating their ancestral lands.
Yeah, and they viewed Western medicine as this attack on their spiritual beliefs. It wasn't just about the technology itself, it was what it represented. A loss of control, their culture being chipped away.
You know, that feeling of being overwhelmed by change, it's something that still resonates today, right?
Right.
As globalization keeps reshaping our world.
Absolutely. It's a timeless theme. And of course, we can't forget the anti-Christian sentiment that was already simmering beneath the surface.
Right, those tensions were already there.
Fueled by, some missionaries who weren't exactly sensitive to Chinese culture. Preston doesn't shy away from the violence that came before the Boxer uprising either. Like the Tientsin massacre of 1870, where innocent nuns were brutally murdered.
That's a chilling reminder of the deep-seated animosity that had been building for decades.
And understanding that context is crucial to really grasp the complexities of the Boxer movement. It's not as simple as just labeling them as xenophobic fanatics. They were a product of a society that was undergoing immense change and, let's face it, a lot of upheaval.
Right, it's never black and white. Now, we can't talk about this period without mentioning the Empress Dowager's Seas. She's this powerful figure known for her love of theatrics and her deep belief in superstition.
Oh, she's a fascinating character.
So how did she get mixed up in this whole Boxer movement?
Her story is all about power struggles and constantly shifting alliances. Imagine the King Court, a place steeped in centuries of tradition, now suddenly facing these mounting pressures.
Both from within and outside China.
Exactly. You have the Emperor Kwangsu, a reformer at heart, trying to drag China into the modern world. But he's eventually imprisoned by the Empress Dowager.
She saw his reforms as a threat.
Absolutely. She saw them as a direct challenge to her authority. So here she is, clinging to tradition, desperately looking for a way to reassert her control.
And then along come the Boxers, claiming they're invincible, thanks to their spiritual powers.
It was like a gift for her. She saw them as a potential weapon against this foreign influence, a force that could restore order and, solidify her grip on power.
So as the seeds of rebellion are being sown in the heart of the Chinese court, life of the legation quarter, where all the foreign diplomats and their families lived, seems almost, well, normal.
It's this strange juxtaposition, isn't it?
Yeah, Preston describes this world of fancy dress balls and tennis tournaments. Like they're living in this bubble, oblivious to the storm that's brewing right outside their gates.
And Preston uses that contrast really effectively. It highlights the disconnect between the foreigner's world, this privileged bubble they've created for themselves, and the growing unrest in the city around them.
Like Lady MacDonald's lavish ball, it almost feels out of place against the backdrop of all this escalating boxer activity.
It's almost surreal. But even within this bubble, cracks start to appear. People like Sir Claude MacDonald, the British minister, and George Morrison, that sharp Times correspondent, they start to realize just how serious things are getting.
So you see these different personalities emerge.
Exactly. You've got MacDonald, a real stickler for rules, even in the midst of chaos. He initially tries to downplay the threat, but then you have Morrison, a keen observer, always looking beneath the surface. He's the one sounding the alarm bells.
Those contrasting viewpoints, they add another layer to the whole story, don't they?
Absolutely. And then comes the decision to bring in foreign guards to protect the legations. That's a real turning point.
It's like they're finally acknowledging that the threat is real, that this unrest is about to boil over.
The tension is palpable. You can almost feel the anxiety gripping the legation quarter as they prepare for the inevitable.
And then it all explodes. Preston describes those first acts of violence with such intensity, it's like you're right there. The burning of the Fengtai railway station, attacks on missionaries, communication lines being cut, it all happens so fast.
A rapid descent into chaos. And for the foreigners scattered across the countryside, it becomes a desperate fight for survival. They're fleeing, trying to reach the safety of the legation quarter, but little do they know, that's about to become a fortress under siege.
It's a stark reminder of how quickly things can spiral out of control, how simmering resentments can erupt into violence, shattering lives, and changing the course of history.
And Preston really takes us right into the heart of that siege. You know, we're not just reading about events, we're experiencing that chaotic influx of missionaries and Chinese Christians, all seeking refuge inside the legations.
Packed in, I imagine.
Crammed into these cramped spaces, trying to create some sense of community amidst this fear and uncertainty. It's really a multinational community thrown together under extraordinary circumstances.
All facing a common enemy. And in the middle of all this chaos, we have figures like Frank Gainwell, a Methodist missionary, emerging as a true hero.
Gainwell's story is incredible. Talk about resourcefulness. He basically takes charge of the legation's defenses and turns them into this surprisingly resilient stronghold. And Preston really dives into the details, you know, how he used his engineering skills to fortify the walls, build barricades, even create an electric lighting system using salvaged parts.
Like MacGyver.
Exactly. He was a man of many talents. But even with these defenses in place, the big question looming over everyone was how long could they actually hold out against this relentless enemy?
Whose supplies are dwindling, they're constantly under threat. It must have felt like a ticking time bomb.
And that's where the story takes another dramatic turn. Preston introduces us to Admiral Seymour and his attempt to relieve the legations with an international naval force.
An ambitious plan, to say the least.
It was a bold move, but ultimately it ends in disaster.
What went wrong?
Well, their journey by rail is fraught with danger from the start. They face constant harassment from both Boxers and Imperial troops, and the discovery of mutilated bodies along the way really underscores the brutality of this conflict.
A grim reminder of what they were up against.
And their eventual retreat back to Tientsin marks a turning point. I mean, the legations are now completely cut off, their hopes of a quick rescue dashed.
It must have felt like the walls were closing in.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that it wasn't just peaking under siege. Preston paints a parallel picture of what's happening in Tientsin, another foreign settlement caught in the crossfire.
So the rebellion is spreading.
It is engulfing a vast area of northern China. We see these chaotic battles in Tientsin, the brave but often disorganized efforts of the Tientsin volunteers, and the devastating bombardment of the foreign settlements.
It's really a multi-front conflict.
Exactly. It shows you just how widespread this uprising had become and how it was drawing in international forces. The Boxer Rebellion was no longer a localized event. It was becoming a conflict with global implications.
And I think one of the things that Preston does so well is capture the human cost of this conflict. You really get a sense of the hardships endured by both the besieged communities in Peking and Tientsin.
The daily struggle for survival, the dwindling supplies, the scorching heat, the constant fear of attack, it takes a toll on everyone.
It's hard to even imagine.
But amidst these hardships, Preston also highlights incredible stories of survival and resilience. She really showcases the strength of the human spirit, those individuals who found a way to rise above the unimaginable circumstances.
The ones who never gave up hope.
Exactly. Like Polly Condit Smith, an American missionary's wife who initially fears for her life, but ends up becoming this pillar of strength for everyone around her.
She really stepped up.
She did. She actively participates in defending the legations, defying expectations, and showing incredible courage.
Talk about a transformation.
And then there's Lou Hoover, the future First Lady of the United States. Well, during the siege, she shows remarkable bravery and compassion as she cares for the wounded in this makeshift hospital in Tientsin.
So even amidst the chaos, there were glimmers of humanity and hope.
Absolutely. And one of the most inspiring aspects of the book for me was the role played by Chinese Christians who risked their own lives to protect their foreign friends.
I can't even imagine the pressure they must have been under torn between loyalties facing danger from both sides.
It's a testament to their courage and loyalty. Preston really gives them a voice, highlighting their contributions to the defense of the legations, which are often overlooked in the historical accounts.
It's a reminder that even in the midst of such conflict, there were bonds of friendship and loyalty that transcended these cultural and religious divides.
And that's what makes Preston's book so compelling. She doesn't just focus on the grand narratives of war and politics. She also brings these events to life through these personal, intimate stories, like anecdotes about daily life under siege, bartering with Chinese soldiers for food, celebrating birthdays amidst the chaos, even the gallows humor that helped people cope with the stress and fear.
Those little details, they really humanize the whole experience.
They remind us that even in the darkest of times, humanity finds a way to persevere.
And as the weeks drag on and turn into months that wait for relief, it must have been agonizing.
You can only imagine false hopes being raised and then dashed, rumors spreading like wildfire through these besieged communities.
It must have been a roller coaster of emotions.
It was, and Preston does a fantastic job of building that suspense. You really feel the desperation of the people trapped inside as they cling to any scrap of news, any glimmer of hope.
And then finally, the moment arrives. The International Relief Force, a coalition of soldiers from various countries, they finally battle their way through to Peking.
It's a hard-fought victory. They face fierce resistance along the way, but they finally break through.
And what a moment that must have been. The relief, the joy after months of fear and uncertainty.
Preston's description of that liberation is incredibly moving. She captures the stark contrast between the rescuers and the rescued. These well-equipped, disciplined troops arriving and seeing the defenders who are ragged, exhausted, but still standing.
The resilience of the human spirit.
Absolutely. And the initial disbelief, the overwhelming emotions, it's palpable.
A moment of triumph, for sure, but also a sobering reminder of the destruction and loss left behind in the rebellion's wake.
Because the aftermath of the Boxer Rebellion is a really complex and unsettling chapter. The looting of Peking, the flight of the Empress Dowager, the uneasy peace negotiations. It all highlights the long-lasting impact of this conflict.
It's not a clean ending.
It's not. And the reprisals faced by the Chinese population were brutal. The humiliation and resentment they felt would continue to fester for years to come.
Sowing the seeds for future unrest.
Exactly. And ultimately, those seeds would contribute to the fall of the Qing dynasty years later. It's a reminder that victory often comes at a steep price, and that the consequences of conflict can echo through generations.
It's like this ripple effect that you can't always predict.
Exactly. And the Boxer Rebellion, it wasn't just a conflict confined to China. It really sent shockwaves throughout the world. It forced both China and the West to take a long, hard look in the mirror and confront some uncomfortable truths.
Like what?
Well, for China, the rebellion exposed the vulnerabilities of the Qing dynasty. It shattered this illusion of imperial might, and it highlighted the deep divisions within Chinese society itself.
Those who are embracing modernization versus those clinging to tradition.
Exactly. And for the West, it tarnished this image they had projected of themselves as these civilized nations.
A bit of hypocrisy there.
Definitely Preston doesn't shy away from that. She points out the hypocrisy of the Western powers, who, while condemning the Boxers' violence, engaged in looting and brutality of their own.
Actions speak louder than words.
They do. And the book reveals the complex dynamics at play within the Allied forces. The national rivalries, the often callous disregard for Chinese lives. It's a reminder that even in the pursuit of seemingly noble goals, power and self-interest can have devastating consequences.
Cautionary tale.
It is. And it raises some big questions about the legacy of colonialism and the impact of foreign intervention in a country that's struggling to find its own path.
To forge its own destiny.
Exactly. The Boxer Rebellion becomes this microcosm of the challenges facing the world at the dawn of a new century. It's a story about clashing cultures, economic disparities, the struggle for power and identity, all themes that we're still grappling with today.
Timeless themes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And there's this one part of the book that really stayed with me. It's the story of Edmund Backhouse, this British scholar who claimed to have this insider's account of the rebellion through his diary.
Oh, I remember that.
But it turned out to be a complete fabrication, a hoax.
Wow, talk about a twist.
It's a fascinating example of how history can be manipulated and how easily we can be misled. Backhouse's story is like this cautionary tale reminding us to always approach historical accounts with a critical eye.
To question what we read and to look for multiple perspectives.
Exactly. We can't just take things at face value. And that's why books like The Boxer Rebellion are so valuable. They challenge us to dig deeper, to question our assumptions, to acknowledge that history is rarely black and white.
It's full of nuance and complexity.
It is. And so, as we try to navigate the complexities of our own world today with its own set of cultural clashes and geopolitical tensions, what can we learn from the Boxer Rebellion?
What are the takeaways?
I think one of the biggest lessons is the importance of understanding different cultures and perspectives, the need for dialogue and cooperation over confrontation. And it reminds us that history isn't just about dates and battles. It's about the choices people make and the consequences that ripple through time.
Those ripples, they can last for centuries.
They can. And that's why studying history is so crucial. It helps us understand not just the past, but also the present. And it gives us some insights into the forces that are shaping our world.
Well said. And for our listeners who are as fascinated by this period as we are, we highly recommend checking out The Boxer Rebellion by Diana Preston. You can find an affiliate link in the description, and your purchase helps support our show.
It's a journey back in time that will captivate your imagination and leave you pondering the complexities of history and the human condition.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into The Boxer Rebellion. We hope you found it enlightening, and we look forward to exploring more fascinating topics with you in the future.